What's up, internet? I have a brand new EP called Closer, and I wanted to show you how I made it. But first I have to give you a bit of context of like how this came about. So my wife, Pink Feathers, as some of you might know from some of my original work, she started taking adult like ballet classes. And because of that, she started to take me to some of the performances here in Portland, Oregon, to the Oregon Ballet Theater. So at first we started to go to the typical ballets like the Nutcracker, Black Swan, things like that. And, you know, obviously I really appreciated it, but like, you know, the music was always, you know, it's very well known. Like, it's not the kind of music that I even felt like, you know, I could change or do anything with. It was just a very different style of music that I was used to making. And then a couple months later, we ended up going to a more modern performance, and that's where the ideas started to flow, I guess, where I started to see like sort of a more contemporary, more experimental type of composing that can be done for this medium. And I was just really impressed with the level of sort of artistry and just how interesting the dance aspect of it was. All the choreography, all of that was super interesting to me. So I basically just reached out to them and was like, hey, I kind of want to try something with you guys if you're down. And sure enough, they were. So that was the beginning of a partnership with them. You know, many months went by, and we're trying to figure out what to do, and they come up with this idea of working with some of the up and coming choreographers within the company. The idea was to work with 4 individual choreographers and write a piece of music unique for them, where they would rehearse it and perform it in I think about a 3-week run, which ended up happening in 2018. All right, so this first track that we're going to look at is called Katherine. I named it after the choreographer that I worked with. I think this music could be broadly described as classical, although I don't really feel like that's very accurate. It was actually mostly done with electronic instruments, aside from maybe the cello. Everything else was done on a computer. And I just kind of wanted to break down the process and show you how I did it, some of the techniques I used, and just kind of give you an idea. So I think most of this music revolves around the piano, and that was really important to kind of nail that part. So I'm actually not a pianist at all. I can dabble on a keyboard. I can play, I know the basic chords and stuff like that. I'm definitely not like an exceptional keyboard player by any means. I'm primarily a guitar player, so like I feel like I can sort of hear the music in my head, but it's really difficult to play that accurately and well on an actual piano. All the piano that you're hearing is technically a digital piano, and I'm using mainly one library, which I've mentioned on this channel before. It's Alicia's Keys. It's a contact library. I think it's amazing. I don't really know the story behind it. I assume maybe it has something to do with Alicia Keys. Anyway, it's a great piano sound, and it was sort of a revelation for me when I discovered that you could, when you lower the velocity to the very lowest level, you get some really interesting harmonics, and like this, it just sounds really cool. One of the main techniques that I tried to use here was just to keep that piano as soft as possible and automate the velocity of every note, so it sort of emulates like the human touch, because a human will never hit the key at the same intensity every time. And this method kind of allowed me to really experiment with all these different chords and just try like an entirely different weird arrangement without having to record a piano, like, sitting down and playing the whole piece over and over again until I got it right, because I definitely wasn't capable of that. Soloing the piano here. If you notice, all these different notes are kind of nudged. They're slightly off the grid. It's really important to me to make this like seem as real as possible. And I primarily wrote this around this motif of just really soft piano notes, kind of jumping from the 7th to the 8th. This will become more clear in some of the other tracks. For example right here. It comes in again here. And as you can see, there's actually some synths coming in here, so. The idea was just to kind of reinforce the piano, just give it some low end and just some sonic diversity. Really, the piano is the main focus, so I'm not trying to take away from that. It's really just to kind of help it out. For me, it was really fun to kind of dive into like the really small detail stuff in this. This method just gives me so much flexibility in terms of like dialing in the right notes and just everything in the right timing and just the right kind of softness on each note. It was really kind of a very labor-intensive thing, but something that I'm really happy with. So here's that motif coming in again. Alright, so moving on to some of the other elements. There's a little bit of drums that come in, but I really tried to keep this minimal. It wasn't about creating anything that was beat driven, although there is some pretty interesting like rhythmic elements. There's a lot of sort of offbeat stuff that is not really noticeable. It kind of makes it feel like it's in the right beat, but it's not. So let me show you that real quick. So those piano chords are coming in early actually. And the kick is sort of reinforcing that, but it's kind of like if you don't have the frame of reference with that snare, you don't really know what it's doing, or it's harder to tell, I guess. Obviously, one of the most prominent elements of this are the strings, and this is something that I'm really proud of. I did write them. I obviously didn't play them, but I hired a fantastic musician. His name's Hamilton Berry, fantastic cello player. I gave him my mock-ups, my virtual strings, and he took them and did the real thing. And I'm super happy with the work that he did. So these are some fake strings that I still kept in there actually to sort of bring it out a little bit. I really like this ricochet element in the Albion Tundra series. It's just a really nice kind of like bed of music to start to work on. I had asked him to do, the parts that I wrote basically, but I also asked him to do a couple like improvisational tracks, and I think that really kind of gave it just another element to play with. I love the cello. I think it's like probably one of the most expressive instruments. It's like, I actually prefer sort of the lower mid-range type of instrument. I think that's why I like a guitar, and that's why I like to tune my guitars down. This was also done all completely remotely, actually, so I haven't even met him. We just did it through the internet, and yeah, it was pretty easy. I could listen to this type of stuff all day. It's so rich in texture. I just love it. And those high notes are actually pretty impressive for a cello. Now I'm gonna just kind of jump into a couple other of the songs from this EP and just show you around. It's a similar concept for the others. It was all kind of based on conversations that I had with the choreographers where we talked about ideas and goals and ways to express this stuff. One of my favorite things about this process is that it was one of the first times I really didn't have to rely on, you know, a strict grid like a 120 BPM type of track. It's really all over the place, and I really spent a lot of time fine-tuning the BPM and the rate. So this is the second track. I called it Makino because that's the name of the choreographer that I worked with, and it has a lot more kind of synth elements, although they're not very obvious. This bass line, for example. So this is actually the Juno 60 sampled, but yes, the Juno 60. And as you can see, this has that same kind of piano motif, just jumping in between the 7th and 8th. Also, just some great improvisation from Hamilton. So this track actually doesn't have any drums at all, any percussion. I guess the piano is technically a percussive instrument, but no drums, basically. Actually, one of my favorite things about working with like a real live instrument is that, especially with a cello, you can get those bends, those kind of like notes in between the notes that you just can't get with like a fake string library, and it really kind of sets it apart in my view. Here's an example of a piano that it would be literally impossible for me to play. I mean, I couldn't do this. And notice all the different velocity here. I guess it's sort of one of the advantages of doing it this way. This song actually, it has this big crescendo. It just kind of stops immediately, so I'll show you that part. It gets pretty dense here. There's a lot of strings and a lot of stuff just kind of coming through. My computer even started to lock up there. Just a lot of stuff happening. Let me show you this swell. It's just a reverse piano chord, I think. Pretty basic stuff. Again, very hard to do this on a cello. This third track that we're going to look at is I called it Lisa, because also named after the choreographer. This one also has a lot of kind of the similar motifs. It was important to me to do something cohesive that worked together, even though they're vastly different performances and choreography. I usually like to write kind of long, drawn-out string melodies. Just kind of lets the instrument breathe. This one actually has some synths. Let's hear them. It's pretty subtle stuff. It's really just to kind of fill it out. Again, like piano stuff that I probably couldn't play. Yeah, I definitely couldn't play this. And in this next section, I really wanted to kind of take a darker turn here. It's slightly dissonant. It was just a way to kind of change up the kind of hopeful feeling. Again, I really like the strings in this part. Just kind of builds tension, keeps it going. So if you notice that one note, I have this in multiple tracks now. Just something to kind of bring it together. before you think it's going to go somewhere else, just kind of take it out. And this final track is called Peter, again, named after the choreographer. So I'm using a bunch of different Albion Tundra libraries here for these kind of string sounds. Obviously mixed with the real stuff that Hamilton recorded. This is probably the one that has the most kind of synths and typical sounds that I use. A lot of the Juno 60 here. Again, that same motif. This is probably the most rhythmically driven out of the bunch. I remember we actually had to tone it down a bit because because it was too intense for the for the dancers. So there's kind of like one big section, but we had to trim it down a bit. Tape delay effects that I like to use. And that's all coming because I'm changing the tempo. It's all always fluctuating. As you can see, here's some tempo fluctuations. This is all stuff that would be very difficult for me to play, but very easy to program. I wanted to create almost like a movie soundtrack kind of feel to this one. Yeah, so I'm using this this library here for these drum sounds. Just kind of different types of percussion, you know, to keep it interesting, while having that sort of soaring kind of. Soaring melody behind it. Again, I really like that kind of noise, improvisational stuff on the strings. It'd be very difficult for me to play this. So that was a behind the scenes look at my new EP, Closer. I really hope you enjoyed it. It's a very different direction for me. It's not like something that I'm definitely intending to kind of write songs in the more similar fashion that I've done in the past, but this was a nice exploration, do something a little more experimental and different. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.